He moved millions with just one call, but he couldn't get his own son to say a single word, until one day he saw something that changed everything. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. William Sterling's world was a universe built on stark, cold logic and meticulously maintained order. It was a place where every element had a specific purpose, every action a predictable outcome, and every person a defined role. His domain was the world of finance, where he was a titan, a man whose decisions could send ripples across global markets. The numbers on his spreadsheets were his language, and they spoke of power, success, and a vast, almost unimaginable fortune. He was, to the outside world, the epitome of a self-made man, a visionary who had clawed his way to the top. But within the sterile, echoing walls of his mansion, a different kind of silence reigned. It was the silence of a man who had everything, but understood so little. His days were a relentless blur. The sun would rise over the skyline of the city, and William would already be on his first conference call, his voice a low, commanding murmur as he directed strategies for his multinational corporation. The hours would melt into each other, filled with board meetings in mahogany-paneled rooms, where his every word was transcribed and analyzed. He was a master of his craft, able to anticipate market shifts and outmaneuver his rivals with a detached, almost predatory precision. This was his comfort zone, the only place where he felt truly in control. His evenings were spent in a mansion that felt less like a home and more like a museum. It was a sprawling monument to his wealth, filled with priceless art and antique furniture that stood as silent, polished testaments to his success. The rooms were vast and impersonal, the air thick with the scent of expensive cleaning supplies. The only signs of life were the hushed movements of the staff, who moved through the halls like ghosts, ensuring every surface was spotless, every cushion plumped, and every light precisely dimmed. The most unpredictable, and therefore most unsettling, element in William's meticulously ordered life was his 6-year-old son, Leo. Leo's world was a kaleidoscope of silent patterns and private routines that William couldn't begin to decipher. He was a beautiful boy with wide, intelligent eyes that seemed to look through people, not at them. He communicated through the tap-tap-tapping of his fingers on surfaces, a rhythmic language that only he understood, and the careful, methodical arrangement of his toy trains. The trains were his world, his comfort, his entire universe. He would spend hours meticulously lining them up, creating intricate tracks that led to nowhere, a private symphony of metal wheels on wooden rails. William loved his son. He would be quick to tell anyone who asked. He funded the best research, hired the most sought-after therapists, and enrolled Leo in the most exclusive schools designed for children with special needs. He spared no expense, believing that money could and should solve every problem. But despite all of his resources, all of his efforts, and all of the experts he had paraded through his home, the chasm between him and his son remained. He saw Leo's autism not as a different way of experiencing the world, but as a problem to be solved, a puzzle that he, with all his vast intelligence, simply couldn't crack. He spoke to Leo in the same direct, logical manner he used with his employees, but his words seemed to vanish into the boy's private world without a trace. The staff in the house were a seamless part of its function. To William, they were faceless figures who performed their duties with quiet efficiency. The nannies, the cooks, the groundskeepers, they were all just cogs in the well-oiled machine that ran his life. He didn't know their names, their stories, or their struggles. They were simply there, an extension of the mansion's impeccable service. This included the new cleaning woman, Ms. Evelyn Reed, who came in the evenings. Evelyn was a single mother, raising her own daughter in a small apartment across town. Her world was a constant battle against time and finances, a struggle William couldn't fathom. She had taken the evening cleaning job at the Sterling mansion because the pay was good, and the hours allowed her to be there for her daughter after school. To her, the job was a means to an end, a quiet, almost meditative ritual of wiping and polishing. She was a woman who was used to being overlooked. To William, she was simply a shadow in the background, a new name on a payroll sheet. She was the one who made the pristine floors gleam a little brighter, the one who dusted the bookshelves with a featherlight touch, ensuring not a single volume was out of place. She moved through the house with a quiet grace, her presence a faint whisper in the grand, silent halls. William had never spoken a word to her, nor had he ever really looked at her. She was simply a part of the house, as invisible to him as the air he breathed. But Evelyn, in her quiet way, saw things. She saw the vast, empty spaces in the mansion and the palpable loneliness that seemed to cling to the boy who lived within them. She saw the silent ritual of the toy trains, not as a strange obsession, but as a form of communication. She would pass by Leo's room and see him on the floor, his face a mask of serene concentration as he worked on his miniature universe. She had never been introduced to him, but she had a natural empathy that drew her to the boy. And so, as the days turned into weeks, a small, unspoken routine developed. After finishing her dusting in the library, Evelyn would sometimes pause outside the door to Leo's playroom. She would listen to the soft, rhythmic tapping of his fingers and the faint click-clack of his trains. She wasn't trying to understand autism. She was simply watching, observing, and in her own quiet way learning. She saw a boy who wasn't broken or lost, but simply living in a world of his own making, a world that was just as valid and beautiful as the one William inhabited. Evelyn's unseen presence became a silent witness to a reality that existed just beyond the reach of the billionaire's sterile, predictable world. It was a reality that was about to collide with William's in the most unexpected way imaginable. William Sterling's day had been an unmitigated disaster, a rare event in his carefully orchestrated existence. The late afternoon had bled into early evening, consumed by a brutal, high-stakes negotiation that had gone sideways. A rival company had unexpectedly pulled out of a deal at the 11th hour, sending a shockwave through the market that had cost his firm millions. He had spent the last 2 hours on the phone, a cold fury simmering just beneath the surface as he directed his legal team to initiate a scorched earth campaign. He was exhausted, his mind a whirlwind of numbers, clauses, and retaliatory strategies. All he wanted was the blessed, numbing silence of his home. He pulled his car into the long, winding driveway of the mansion, the wheels crunching on the perfect gravel. The house, a bastion of quiet order, stood against the twilight sky like a fortress of solitude. He entered through the grand double doors, the heavy wood swinging shut behind him and sealing him off from the chaos of the world. The air inside was cool and still, scented faintly with lemon polish. This was his sanctuary, a place where no one dared to raise their voice, where every sound was muted by thick carpets and heavy drapes. He expected to find a hushed house, a haven of tranquil predictability. But as he made his way toward the library, a sound pierced the silence, a sound so foreign and unexpected that he stopped dead in his tracks. It was a laugh. Not the polite, contained chuckle of an adult, but a genuine, unrestrained sound of pure joy. It was a sound he hadn't heard in years, a sound he had almost forgotten existed within these walls. And then another one followed, higher and softer, but just as full of warmth. The sound was coming from the grand living room, a space William rarely used, preferring the more private confines of the library. He moved toward the open doorway, his custom-made shoes making no sound on the polished marble floors. He peered into the room, and the sight that met his eyes was so startling, so profoundly out of place, that he felt a jolt run through him. On the floor, amidst the priceless Persian rugs and antique furniture, his son Leo was on his hands and knees. His head was tipped back, a wide, breathtaking smile stretched across his face, and he was giggling. It wasn't the small, contained giggle he sometimes made when a new train arrived. This was a deep, unrestrained belly laugh. He was tapping his own train against the floor in a rapid, excited rhythm. Opposite him, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was Evelyn. Her cleaning cart, a wheeled sentinel of her duties, was pushed discreetly to the side. She had a small dust cloth in her hand, but it was forgotten. In her other hand were 2 of Leo's toy trains. She was making them talk to each other in silly, high-pitched voices. Choo-choo-choo, Evelyn chirped, making one train wobble toward the other. Hello, little red train. Where are you going? She moved the other train forward, its wheels clicking softly. I'm going to the big station. The big station is where all the happy trains go. Leo, captivated, giggled again, his entire body shaking with mirth. He was tapping his own train, a shiny black locomotive, against the floor. It was his way of responding, of joining in the conversation. His eyes, usually distant and focused on some internal landscape, were locked onto Evelyn's face. He was present. He was engaged. He was, in that moment, just a happy little boy playing with his friend. William froze in the doorway, his body a statue of disbelief. He had spent a fortune trying to elicit this kind of response from his son. He had hired specialists who used expensive, high-tech tools and a clinical, detached approach. They had talked about interventions and behavioral therapies, about structured play and social skill development. He had sat through endless meetings with them, listening to their jargon, and watching as they tried and failed to break through to Leo. And here was Evelyn, a woman he had barely registered, doing it effortlessly with a handful of toy trains and a silly voice. He watched her, a woman in a simple gray uniform, her face kind and gentle, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she smiled at his son. She wasn't treating Leo as a puzzle to be solved or a problem to be managed. She wasn't following a pre-approved script or a clinical strategy. She was just playing with him, meeting him on his own terms, in his own private world. She had entered his universe of trains and rhythms, and she had done it with a sincerity and warmth that was entirely new to him. The sight stirred something in William's chest. It was a deep, warm sensation that was utterly foreign to him. It was a mixture of gratitude, wonder, and a profound sense of shame. He had been so focused on fixing his son that he had never once considered the simple, powerful act of just being with him. He had paid for the best, believing that only experts could navigate the complex landscape of his son's mind. But Evelyn, a woman without a single credential or degree, had found the key in a moment of genuine human connection. She had seen the boy behind the diagnosis and had spoken to him in his own language. As he watched them, a profound realization began to dawn on William. The immense wealth he had accumulated, the power he wielded, the control he so desperately craved, none of it mattered. It was all a cold, hollow shell. The real, invaluable currency of the world wasn't found in stock markets or boardrooms. It was found in the sound of his son's laughter and the simple, effortless connection between a cleaning woman and a lonely little boy. In that moment, standing silently in the doorway, unseen, William Sterling realized that the greatest tragedy of his life wasn't the millions he had lost in a bad deal. It was the years he had spent building a world of wealth and silence, while a universe of joy and laughter had been happening on the floor of his own living room, a universe he had been too blind to see. William Sterling stood in the doorway, a silent, unmoving statue of a man who was used to controlling every variable. His brain, a finely tuned instrument for risk assessment and profit margins, was struggling to process the scene before him. He was not in a boardroom, where every gesture and word was calculated. He was in his own living room, watching a spectacle that defied all of his known logic. The air, usually so still and impersonal, was now thick with the palpable, undeniable warmth of genuine joy. He remained unseen, a ghost in his own house, and from this vantage point, he observed Evelyn with a new, intense focus. He saw the kindness in her eyes as she made the toy trains talk, her face illuminated by a gentle, unself-conscious smile. He noticed the soft lines around her mouth that suggested a life of hard work, and the patient way she leaned forward, completely engrossed in Leo's world. She wasn't just performing a task, she was sharing a moment, a piece of herself, with a boy who had been largely unreachable. Evelyn was doing more than just playing. She was mirroring Leo's actions, tapping her fingers rhythmically when he did, humming a soft, wordless tune that seemed to match the silent symphony of his mind. She wasn't trying to force him into a neurotypical mold. Instead, she was entering his world, respecting its rules, and finding a way to connect within its unique landscape. She made no demands, issued no commands, and had no expectations. Her only goal seemed to be to share the moment, and in doing so, she had found a key that all of William's paid experts had missed. The professionals he had hired were meticulous in their approach. They had charts and graphs, progress reports, and long, complicated theories about behavior modification. They spoke of building bridges and opening doors, but their methods were clinical and detached. They would set up structured play sessions, using flashcards and carefully chosen toys, and their success was measured in data points. William had paid them millions for their expertise, trusting that their academic knowledge was the only path forward. He had believed that the most valuable thing he could give his son was access to the best scientific minds. But here was Evelyn, with a dust rag and 2 toy trains, achieving what they couldn't. He watched as Leo, in a moment of pure, uninhibited excitement, reached out and gently touched Evelyn's hand. It was a fleeting gesture, barely a second long, but to William, it was a seismic event. His son, who recoiled from physical touch and lived in a bubble of his own making, had reached out. Evelyn didn't flinch or make a big deal of it. She simply smiled at him, a silent acknowledgement that she had seen and received his touch. She had built a bridge not with theory, but with empathy. A profound and unsettling realization began to wash over William. He had seen his son's autism as a problem to be solved, a challenge to be overcome. He had viewed his role as a father through the lens of a CEO. Provide the best resources, hire the best team, and wait for a favorable outcome. He had treated Leo's life like a business transaction, believing that if he just invested enough money and time, the right result would be achieved. But he had forgotten the most crucial element, a human connection. He had forgotten how to simply be a father, not a provider. He had forgotten how to connect, not just manage. The shame he felt was a cold, sharp stab to the gut. He had a man of immense power, able to influence global economies, yet he was utterly helpless in the face of his own son's needs. He had built an empire of steel and glass, but he had failed to build a simple, loving connection with the one person who mattered most. He had been so focused on the external world, on the relentless pursuit of more, that he had become blind to the quiet, profound needs of his own family. He thought back to all the times he had walked past Evelyn in the halls, never once acknowledging her presence. To him, she had been a part of the backdrop, a silent figure in a gray uniform, as invisible as the air he breathed. And yet, she was the one who had seen his son. She was the one who had understood that Leo's world wasn't a prison to be broken out of, but a unique and beautiful place to be explored. She saw the boy, not the diagnosis. The chasm between William and Leo suddenly seemed less like a mystery of the human mind and more like a failure of his own heart. He had been absent, both physically and emotionally. He had outsourced his role as a father to an army of paid professionals, and in doing so, he had lost the one thing that money could never buy, the love and trust of his own child. As he watched Evelyn make one of the train's kiss, Leo's in a gentle tap, a quiet voice inside him whispered a truth he had long ignored. The greatest wealth isn't in what you own, but in who you are. Evelyn wasn't a CEO or a doctor. She was simply a kind person. And in her kindness, she had effortlessly created a connection that had eluded him for years. The moment changed everything, not because it was a magical cure, but because it was a profound, humbling lesson for a man who believed he had nothing left to learn. It was in that moment, watching an invisible woman bring his son to life, that William Sterling began to truly see. He saw his son not as a problem, but as a person, and in seeing that, he began to see himself in a way he never had before, as a father who had a great deal of work to do. The next morning, William Sterling arrived at his office in a state of profound disquiet. The previous evening's image of Evelyn and Leo, of his son's unrestrained laughter and Evelyn's gentle patience, was a loop playing in his mind. He sat through a high-level strategy meeting, his executives droning on about market shares and quarterly projections, but the words felt hollow, a distant echo compared to the silent tapping of his son's fingers. He signed a document authorizing a multi-million-dollar acquisition, and for the first time in his life, the action felt meaningless. The real value, he now understood, was not in what he could buy, but in what he had been given for free, a glimpse of his son's happiness. He couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy. All his life, he had prided himself on his ability to find solutions. And yet, the one problem that mattered most, his son's isolation, had been solved not by a brilliant mind or an expensive program, but by a cleaning woman with a kind heart. He felt a deep, unfamiliar sense of humility. The cold, sterile logic of his world had failed him, and it was a simple act of empathy that had shown him the way. He knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that his approach to fatherhood had to change, and that Evelyn Reed was the catalyst for that change. He left the office early, a move so unprecedented that his personal assistant looked at him with a mixture of shock and concern. He drove home, his mind racing with a plan he had no idea how to execute. He was a man accustomed to giving orders, to dictating terms and negotiating contracts. But this was different. This was a personal request, an appeal to another human being's compassion, and he felt utterly out of his depth. How do you ask a person to enter your family's life, to fill a void you didn't even know you had, without making it sound like a business transaction? He found Evelyn in the kitchen, carefully wiping down the gleaming granite countertops. She moved with her usual quiet grace, her presence almost undetectable. He cleared his throat, a loud, awkward sound in the silent room. Evelyn turned, her eyes widening slightly in surprise to see him home so early. "Ms. Reed," he began, his voice rough and unsure. He hadn't used her name before, and the sound of it on his tongue felt strange. "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice soft and polite. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, a posture of respect and quiet professionalism. William hesitated, his carefully prepared words suddenly seeming cold and inadequate. I wanted to talk to you about something. It's about my son, Leo. A flicker of understanding passed over Evelyn's face, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I saw what you were doing yesterday, William said, the words tumbling out of him. With the trains. I saw him, he was laughing. He paused, a lump forming in his throat. I haven't heard him laugh like that in a long time. It was a genuine sound. Evelyn's gaze was steady and kind. He's a wonderful little boy, Mr. Sterling. He just sees the world in his own way. You connected with him in a way no one else has, William continued, feeling the awkwardness of his own confession. I've paid a great deal of money to therapists, to specialists, to people with long lists of qualifications. But none of them have ever reached him like you did. Not with their charts, not with their theories. You just played with him. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the proposal. I want to offer you a new position. I don't want you to be the cleaning woman anymore. I want you to be Leo's companion. Not a therapist, not a teacher. Just a friend. Evelyn was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. The offer was so far beyond the realm of what she had ever imagined. Mr. Sterling, I'm just a cleaner, she said, her voice filled with gentle apprehension. I don't have any training. I don't know anything about autism. You know enough, William countered, his voice gaining a touch of its familiar authority. You know how to be patient. You know how to be kind. You know how to listen to him, even when he isn't speaking. That's more than any expert has ever given him. He looked at her, his usual mask of impassivity replaced by a look of sincere, almost desperate hope. I'm not hiring you for your credentials, Evelyn. I'm hiring you for the way you saw my son, for the way you made him laugh. He could see the hesitation in her eyes. The offer was life-changing, but it was also a leap into the unknown. She was a woman of routine and stability, and this was a proposition that would upend her entire life. I will, of course, compensate you generously, he added, his business instincts kicking in. I'll double your salary to start, and you won't have to clean anymore. Your only responsibility will be with Leo, to play with him, to read to him, to just be there for him. Evelyn was a single mother. The double salary was a life-altering amount of money. It meant a better life for her daughter, the end of her constant worry about bills, a chance for a future she had only dared to dream of. She thought of Leo, of his beautiful, expressive eyes, of the private world he inhabited, and she felt a pull of genuine affection. She wasn't an expert, but she was a mother. She knew what it was to love a child, to want to see them happy. I'll do it, Mr. Sterling, she said finally, a quiet resolve in her voice. I'd be honored. William felt a rush of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding his breath. Thank you, Evelyn. Truly, thank you. Evelyn offered him a small, genuine smile. I'm just happy to help, Mr. Sterling. Happy to be here for Leo. And in that moment, in the sterile, silent kitchen of his vast mansion, a new arrangement was sealed. It wasn't a business deal. It was a pact built on a foundation of unspoken understanding, a shared love for a little boy, and the silent promise of a man who was finally learning to see. The billionaire CEO had just hired the most important person in his life, and he had done so not with his immense fortune, but with the fragile, newfound humility of a father. Evelyn's new role in the Sterling mansion was a quiet revolution. The cleaning cart was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose that resonated far beyond the confines of her previous duties. She was no longer a shadow in the background, a silent figure in a gray uniform. She was a presence, a steady and gentle force in the life of a little boy who had been largely alone in his own world. The grand, silent rooms of the mansion now held a different kind of life, a life built on patience, observation, and an unspoken, deeply felt understanding. Her mornings began not with the clatter of cleaning supplies, but with a simple greeting to Leo. She learned his routines and discovered his sensitivities with the keen eye of a mother, not the detached analysis of a professional. She knew that loud noises could send him into a state of distress, so she learned to speak in a soft, even tone. She understood that his world was a place of ordered predictability, so she never changed his schedule without a gentle, clear warning. She didn't try to change him, she joined him. She was an uninvited guest who had been welcomed into the most private corners of his universe. Evelyn's first days were spent in observation. She watched as Leo meticulously lined up his trains, a silent, intricate ballet of metal and wood. She noticed the specific order he placed them in, the way he would tap each one with a fingertip before moving to the next. She never interrupted the ritual. Instead, she would sit on the floor nearby, humming a soft, low tune that seemed to match the rhythm of his tapping. She wasn't just a bystander. She was an accompanist, a silent partner in his private symphony. Slowly, she began to find her way in. She would bring a new train into the room, placing it a small distance from his. She would make it roll forward, a little hesitant choo-choo sound escaping her lips. Leo, at first, would ignore it. But Evelyn was patient. She would just sit with him, the new train a quiet invitation. And then one day he surprised her. He picked up the new train, examined it with his serious, focused eyes, and then placed it at the very end of his meticulously ordered line. It was a small act, but to Evelyn, it was a profound sign of trust. He had incorporated her offering into his world. The real breakthrough came with their communication. Evelyn didn't bombard him with questions or demands for eye contact. Instead, she used simple words and pictures. She created flashcards with images of trains, balls, and books. When she wanted to read to him, she would hold up the card with the picture of a book and say, "Book." She would wait patiently for him to acknowledge her. He would often just tap the floor with his fingers, a sound that she had come to recognize as his way of saying, "I see you." One afternoon, she brought a new book into the room, a colorful story about a cat. She held up the picture of the cat and said the word. Leo, for a brief, breathtaking second, looked directly into her eyes. It was the first time she had seen the full, unfiltered light of his gaze. She didn't react with surprise or excitement. She simply smiled at him, a silent acknowledgement that she had seen him. Then, she opened the book and began to read, her voice a gentle balm in the quiet room. As the days turned into weeks, Leo began to open up. He started to make eye contact for a few seconds at a time, a small but monumental victory. He would occasionally take her hand to show her a new train he had discovered or a pattern he had created. He trusted her. He knew she wouldn't try to pull him out of his world, but would instead meet him in it. Evelyn taught him a new game. She would take one of his trains and hide it under a cushion. "Where's the train?" she would ask in a playful whisper. Leo, after a moment of consideration, would find it, a small smile playing on his lips. This simple game was teaching him the concept of object permanence, and more importantly, the joy of shared play. Evelyn, in her simple, intuitive way, was doing what no expert had been able to do. She wasn't treating him as a list of symptoms or a puzzle to be solved. She saw a little boy who was just trying to navigate a world that was often too loud, too fast, and too overwhelming. She gave him a safe place to be himself, a quiet haven where he didn't have to pretend to be someone he wasn't. She was his anchor, his guide, and his friend. The mansion, once a bastion of sterile quiet, was now a place of soft sounds and gentle rhythms. The click-clack of trains, the low hum of Evelyn's songs, and the occasional precious sound of a small boy's laugh. Evelyn wasn't unlocking Leo's world. She was showing him that he didn't have to be alone in it. And in doing so, she was unknowingly building a bridge not just to the boy, but to the man who was watching them from the shadows, a man who was finally learning to see. William Sterling's schedule, once a rigid, unyielding testament to his work ethic, began to undergo a subtle but profound transformation. The 80-hour workweeks, once a source of pride, were quietly and unceremoniously pruned. Meetings that would have once run late into the evening were now concluded promptly at 5 p.m. His board members, initially perplexed by this sudden shift, were met with an uncharacteristically vague explanation. "I have other responsibilities." The true responsibility, he knew, was waiting for him at home. He found himself leaving the office earlier and earlier, his car making the long drive back to the mansion with a new sense of urgency. The house, which had long been a silent backdrop to his life, was now the place where the day's most important events were unfolding. He would come home not to a place of sterile quiet, but to a place alive with the soft sounds of a little boy's world. He no longer went straight to the library or his study. He would pause in the doorway, a silent observer of the scene unfolding before him. He watched Evelyn and Leo from a distance, usually from the archway of the library, the door slightly ajar. He was a man who, for years, had seen the world through the lens of data and profit margins. Now, he was learning to see through the lens of human connection. He saw Evelyn's infinite patience, a quality he had long admired in successful negotiators, but had never truly understood in a personal context. He watched as she waited for Leo to respond, sometimes for minutes at a time, her face a mask of serene expectation. She never rushed him, never filled the silence with unnecessary chatter. She simply waited, a silent testament to her belief in his ability to communicate in his own time. He saw the quiet joy that lit up her face with each of Leo's small victories. When Leo made eye contact for a fleeting moment, he saw her quiet, inward smile. When Leo took her hand to show her a new arrangement of his trains, he saw the warmth that radiated from her. These weren't grand gestures or dramatic breakthroughs. They were small, quiet miracles that, together, were building a bridge across the chasm that had separated him from his son. He had paid millions for a miracle, and it was being delivered to him, free of charge, in daily, unassuming installments. Through Evelyn, William began to see his son not as a problem to be solved, but as a person with his own unique and beautiful way of experiencing the world. He realized that Leo's obsession with trains wasn't a symptom of his condition. It was a way for him to understand and control a world that was often overwhelming. His rhythmic tapping wasn't a tic, it was his own private language, a melody of his own making. Evelyn wasn't trying to fix these things. She was simply learning to speak their language. She was teaching William how to be a father, one quiet observation at a time. He started joining them, at first tentatively, then with more confidence. He would sit on the floor, a billionaire CEO in a bespoke suit, and try to make the trains talk. He was awkward at first, his voice stilted and unnatural, but Evelyn would guide him with a soft smile and a gentle word of encouragement. "He likes the high-pitched ones, Mr. Sterling," she would say. "He likes it when they sound happy." He would try again, a small, silly sound escaping his lips, and he would be rewarded with a quick glance from Leo, a silent acknowledgement that his father was trying to enter his world. The conversations he began to have with Evelyn in the evenings were different from any he had ever had before. They weren't about business or logistics. They were about Leo. They would talk for hours about his progress, his quirks, his latest discoveries. Evelyn would tell him about the small victories of the day. How Leo had smiled at a picture in a book, how he had finally sorted the trains by color, or how he had almost said a new word. William would listen, captivated, feeling the cold, hard shell around his heart begin to soften. He was learning to be a father not from a book, but from the simple, profound wisdom of a woman who saw the world with her heart. He saw Evelyn not just as an employee, but as a person of immense wisdom and kindness. He was a man who had built an empire on seeing the value in things, and he was beginning to see the immeasurable value in her. She was a woman who saw the world for what it was, not what it could be bought for. She had a quiet strength and a deep well of empathy that he had never encountered before. He had always believed that success was a solitary journey, a lonely climb to the top. But Evelyn was showing him that the most important journey wasn't a climb at all. It was a descent, a journey inward, into the heart of his own family. William's world was no longer sterile and predictable. It was now a world filled with the quiet rhythms of a little boy, the gentle guidance of a kind woman, and the burgeoning, terrifying, and utterly beautiful realization that the greatest riches in life had nothing to do with money at all. He was no longer just a billionaire CEO. He was a man who was learning to see. He was a man who was, for the first time in his life, learning to be a father. The day it happened was a Tuesday, a day that began like any other in the Sterling mansion. The air was cool and crisp, a soft autumn light filtering through the towering windows. William had concluded his morning conference calls and was now in his study, a stack of financial reports on his desk, his mind attempting to focus on the relentless demands of his empire. But his concentration was fractured, his thoughts drifting inevitably toward the gentle hum of activity in the living room, where Evelyn and Leo were spending their afternoon. He found himself counting the minutes until he could put down his work and join them, a habit that had become the most important part of his day. In the living room, Evelyn was sitting on the floor with Leo, a colorful picture book open between them. It was a simple story about a little boy and his dog, a story she had read to him countless times. Leo was on his stomach, surrounded by his ever-present trains, but his attention was on the book. His eyes, usually distant, were fixed on the vibrant illustrations. Evelyn's voice was a soft, melodic hum as she read the familiar words, her finger tracing the pictures. She had no grand expectations for this session. It was simply a shared moment, a quiet ritual of connection. She reached the final page of the book. The illustration showed the little boy hugging his dog, his face full of love. Evelyn paused, pointing to the picture with a gentle finger. "He loves his dog," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet warmth. "He loves his dog very, very much." She closed the book, the soft thud of the pages a familiar sound. Leo was quiet for a moment, a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. He was still lying on the floor, his trains a silent universe around him. Evelyn didn't rush him. She simply sat, waiting, observing the silent language of his tapping fingers. And then, something extraordinary happened. Leo slowly lifted a small, deliberate finger. His hand, so often a tool for ordering his trains, now moved with a new sense of purpose. He pointed at the closed book, his finger hovering over the picture of the boy and the dog. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes meeting hers for longer than they ever had before, a gaze so clear and focused that it took her breath away. Then he spoke. "Dog," he said. The word was a quiet, almost hesitant sound. It was rough and a little rusty, as if it had been waiting a long time to be used. But it was clear. It was precise. It was undeniably a word. Evelyn froze. She wasn't an emotional woman, but in that moment, her eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back, not wanting to break the spell. She didn't shout or exclaim. She didn't call for William. She simply smiled at Leo, her heart a symphony of 1,000 emotions. "Yes, Leo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That's right. Dog." Leo, as if the effort had exhausted him, looked away and returned to his trains, his fingers resuming their rhythmic tapping. But the room was no longer the same. A new sound had been introduced, a sound that had been waiting for 6 long years to be heard. William, drawn by an inexplicable pull, had left his study moments before. He was walking toward the living room, a vague premonition stirring within him, when he heard Evelyn's quiet, emotional voice. He stood in the doorway, his usual unseen post, and watched the scene unfold. He watched as his son, the boy he had feared would never speak, uttered a single, perfect word. He watched Evelyn's tear-filled eyes, the way she didn't celebrate with fanfare, but with a quiet, profound reverence for the moment. The sight hit him with the force of a physical blow. The report he had been holding fell from his hand, scattering across the polished floor, but he didn't even notice. He was a man accustomed to witnessing moments of great power and influence, but nothing had ever felt so significant, so world-altering, as that one small word. It was a sound that had shattered the silence he had long mistaken for peace. It was a sign that the bridge Evelyn had been building was not just a bridge of connection, but a bridge to the outside world, a bridge that his son had, for the first time, chosen to cross. A profound sense of gratitude, so powerful it was almost painful, washed over him. It was a gratitude directed at Evelyn, at this woman who, with nothing more than her gentle heart and quiet patience, had given his son a voice. She had seen the person within the silent shell, and she had given him the gift of expression. He had provided the best of everything money could buy, but Evelyn had given him the one thing that was truly priceless. His face, usually a mask of stoic control, was now a portrait of raw, uninhibited emotion. He felt tears sting his own eyes, a foreign sensation for a man who had long prided himself on his emotional detachment. He didn't move. He simply stood in the doorway, watching Evelyn, his heart overflowing with an overwhelming mix of awe, wonder, and a deep, abiding love for the woman who had not only given his son a voice, but had shown him, a billionaire CEO, the true meaning of wealth. In that single perfect moment, William Sterling realized that the greatest victory of his life had nothing to do with numbers or acquisitions. It was a single simple word, spoken by a small boy, and witnessed by a man who had finally truly learned to see. The dam had broken, and a new world was about to come rushing in. That single word, dog, had broken a dam that had held back a lifetime of unspoken emotion. It was the first stone in a foundation that would not be built of cold, hard logic, but of love, patience, and a shared, profound understanding. William no longer watched from the doorway. He walked into the room, his face a mixture of awe and wonder, and knelt on the floor beside his son. He didn't speak. He simply put a hand on Leo's small back, a gentle, reassuring gesture that spoke more than words ever could. For the first time, he wasn't a CEO or a provider. He was simply a father, present and connected. The days that followed were a testament to the transformative power of that single word. The chasm that had existed between the three of them slowly began to close, brick by brick, moment by moment. The silent, sterile house began to fill with the sounds of a family. William started joining Evelyn and Leo on the floor for their afternoon sessions, not as an observer, but as a participant. He learned how to speak to his son in a language of trains and rhythms, and he began to see the world through a new lens, a lens that was focused on a child's unique way of seeing things, not on his own preconceived notions. He was awkward at first. His movements were too abrupt, his voice too loud, his attempts at silly train noises a little too forced. But Evelyn, with her gentle smile and quiet guidance, would help him navigate this new territory. "Leo likes it when you hum, Mr. Sterling," she would say softly. "He feels the vibrations." And William would try a low, hesitant hum escaping his lips, a sound so foreign to the man who was used to giving crisp, commanding orders. He was learning to be a father not from a parenting book, but from the simple, intuitive wisdom of a woman who was a natural mother. The evenings became their time. After Leo was asleep, William and Evelyn would sit in the library, not in a professional capacity, but as two people who had found a deep, shared connection. Their conversations were easy and natural, built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared love for the little boy who had brought them together. They would talk for hours about Leo's progress, his quirks, his latest discoveries. William would listen, captivated, as Evelyn recounted the small victories of the day. How Leo had sorted his blocks by size, how he had almost said another word, how he had taken her hand to show her a new pattern he had made with his trains. William began to share his own stories he had never told anyone before. He spoke about his own lonely childhood, about the relentless drive for success that had always defined him, about the emotional distance he had kept from everyone, including his own son. Evelyn listened without judgment, her gaze steady and compassionate. She saw the man behind the billionaire, the man who was just as lost and isolated as his son had been. She saw his vulnerability, his fear, and his deep, abiding love for his child. Through their conversations, William began to see Evelyn not just as a caregiver, but as a person of immense wisdom and quiet strength. He admired her resilience, her unwavering kindness, and her ability to find joy in the simple things. He realized that she had a richness of spirit that his vast fortune could never buy. She was a woman who saw the value in a child's laugh, in a shared moment, in the warmth of a simple connection. She was teaching him that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the moments that made up a life. The cold, hard shell that had protected William Sterling for so many years began to crack and crumble. He found himself laughing more, his sterile world slowly filling with warmth and color. He saw Evelyn not as an employee, but as an equal, a partner, a friend. He started asking her about her life, about her own daughter, about her dreams and her fears. He was learning to see her not as an invisible part of his household, but as a complex, beautiful human being who had, in her own quiet way, saved him. One evening, as they were sitting in the library, the fire casting a warm glow on the room, he looked at her and felt a profound, undeniable truth settle in his heart. He couldn't imagine his life without her. He couldn't imagine a future without her quiet grace, her gentle wisdom, and her unwavering love for his son. The cold, sterile logic of his world had been replaced by the warm, terrifying, and utterly beautiful logic of his heart. He was falling in love, not just with the woman who had brought his son to life, but with the woman who had brought him back to life as well. The family of three was not a family of blood, but a family of connection, a family forged in the quiet moments on the floor of a grand living room, a family built on a single, precious word. William, Evelyn, and Leo had found each other, and in doing so, they had found a love that was deeper and richer than any of them could have ever imagined. The mansion, once a bastion of William Sterling's solitude, had been transformed into a home, and the change was palpable. The grand rooms, once silent and sterile, now echoed with the gentle sounds of a family, the click-clack of toy trains, the soft melodies Evelyn hummed, and the occasional precious sound of Leo's laughter. But for William, the greatest transformation had occurred within himself. The cold, logical man who had once viewed his life as a series of business transactions now saw it through the lens of emotion, connection, and a deep, abiding love that had taken root in his heart. He had fallen in love with Evelyn. It wasn't the kind of love he had read about in books or seen in movies. It was something quieter, more profound. It was a love born not of grand gestures, but of shared moments on the floor of his living room. It was a love built on mutual respect, on the silent understanding that passed between them as they watched Leo, and on the quiet wisdom she possessed that had taught him more than any business school ever could. He loved her for her patience, her kindness, her strength, and for the way she had, without even trying, brought him back to life. He knew, with a certainty that was both exhilarating and terrifying, that he couldn't imagine his future without her. The thought of returning to his old life, to a mansion filled with silence and a heart filled with emptiness, was unbearable. He had a woman who saw him for who he was, not for what he owned. He had a woman who loved his son as if he were her own. He had a woman who had given him a family. The decision to propose was not a business strategy, but a conclusion of the heart. It was the most important decision of his life, and he wanted it to be perfect. He spent weeks planning, his mind, once so focused on corporate mergers, now fixated on a single, romantic gesture. He wanted to do something that was truly from the heart, something that would show her how much she meant to him, a gesture that was as far removed from his business world as possible. One evening, after Leo was fast asleep, he asked Evelyn to join him in the library. She entered, her face a picture of quiet calm, expecting to discuss Leo's schedule or progress. She sat in her usual armchair by the fireplace, the flames casting a warm glow on her face. William, however, didn't sit down. He stood by the mantel, his hands clasped, a nervous energy radiating from him that was completely uncharacteristic. "Evelyn," he began, his voice a little shaky, "I wanted to talk to you about something important." She looked at him, her steady gaze filled with gentle inquiry. He took a deep breath. "When I hired you, I thought I was hiring a caregiver for my son. I thought I was making a business decision, a way to solve a problem. But you did so much more than that. You didn't just care for Leo, you saw him. You saw the person he was, not the challenges he faced. You met him in his world, and in doing so, you showed me how to meet him there too." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You didn't just give me my son back. You gave me myself back. I was a man who had everything, but I was living in a world of silence and loneliness. You brought laughter, warmth, and love into this house. You taught me that the greatest riches aren't in what you own, but in the people you love. You taught me how to be a father, Evelyn. You taught me how to love." He moved from the mantel and knelt on one knee in front of her, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his pocket. The gesture was so far removed from the man she had first met that it took her breath away. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a simple, elegant engagement ring. The diamond, a brilliant solitaire, was magnificent, but it was the quiet sincerity in his eyes that held her captive. "Evelyn," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I love you. I love the way you see the world, the way you care for Leo, the way you have filled my life with a happiness I never knew was possible. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want us to be a family. Will you marry me?" Evelyn was speechless, tears welling in her eyes. The proposal was not about money or status. It was about love, gratitude, and the promise of a future they had built together, brick by quiet brick. She saw the man who had humbled himself, the man who had learned to kneel on the floor and play with trains, the man who had found his heart. She saw the man she had grown to love, not just for his kindness to her and Leo, but for the beautiful, vulnerable person he was becoming. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Oh yes, William. 1,000 times yes." William, his face a mixture of relief and pure joy, slipped the ring on her finger. The fit was perfect. He stood up, and for the first time, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. She rested her head on his chest, and she could hear the strong, steady beat of his heart. It was a sound that had once been cold and distant, but was now filled with the warmth of a love that had changed everything. The billionaire CEO and the former cleaning woman were no longer defined by their pasts. They were simply a man and a woman who had found each other, a family built on a foundation of a child's laughter and a love that was richer than any fortune in the world. Their lives had been irrevocably intertwined, a beautiful tapestry woven from the threads of shared experience, mutual respect, and a love that had grown from the quietest of beginnings. The future stretched out before them, not as a sterile, predictable path, but as a journey filled with the promise of a life lived, finally, with love and purpose. The wedding was a quiet, private affair, held in the sun-drenched gardens of the Sterling mansion. It was a day filled not with pomp and circumstance, but with genuine joy and intimacy. Evelyn, radiant in a simple, elegant gown, walked down an aisle adorned with wildflowers, her hand held tightly by the man who had once been a distant, unknowable figure. William, his face a portrait of profound happiness, waited for her with Leo standing faithfully by his side, his small hand clasped in his father's. The vows they exchanged were not about wealth or status, but about love, family, and the quiet, unwavering promise to cherish each other and their son for all time. Their home was no longer a silent museum. It was a place filled with laughter, with the sounds of toy trains, and with the warmth of genuine connection. Evelyn became a stay-at-home mother, her days filled with the quiet, profound joy of raising Leo. She taught him to bake simple cookies, his small, flour-dusted hands patting the dough with serious concentration. She would take him to the local park, where he would watch the children play from a safe distance, slowly learning to be a part of the world around him. She was his guide, his anchor, and the unwavering light that showed him the way forward. William's life, too, had been irrevocably transformed. The cutthroat world of finance still demanded his attention, but his priorities had shifted entirely. His work was no longer his sole identity. He was a father, a husband, a man who had found his purpose not in the pursuit of wealth, but in the love of his family. His schedule, once a rigid testament to his ambition, was now a flexible blueprint for his life. He made it a point to be home every afternoon, to join Evelyn and Leo on the floor, to be present for the small, daily miracles that were unfolding in his son's life. He was learning to speak Leo's language, a language of trains and silent rhythms, and in doing so, he was building a bond with his son that was deeper and richer than any he had ever imagined. His colleagues and competitors noticed the change. The ruthless, detached CEO had been replaced by a man who seemed to have a new light in his eyes. He was still a formidable force in the business world, but his decisions were now tempered with a newfound sense of empathy. He spoke not just of profit margins, but of purpose and impact. His company, once solely focused on the bottom line, began to shift its focus, investing in sustainable projects and charitable foundations. The most profound shift, however, came from William's own initiative. He had experienced firsthand the struggle of a family trying to navigate the complexities of autism, and he knew that his vast resources could be used for good. He started a foundation, the Sterling Family Foundation, dedicated to supporting children with autism and their families. He used his wealth, his influence, and his own personal experience to fund research, to create schools and programs that focused not on fixing children, but on understanding and celebrating their unique abilities. He hired therapists and educators who, like Evelyn, believed in the power of empathy and connection, not just clinical theory. The foundation was his legacy, a testament to the man he had become, a man who had learned that the greatest wealth was in giving back. Evelyn, once the invisible woman who had cleaned the grand halls of the mansion, was now a partner in his life and his work. She was on the board of the foundation, her quiet wisdom and unique perspective invaluable to its mission. She would meet with families, sharing her own story, offering them not just financial support, but the one thing that had meant the most to her, hope. She was no longer just a cleaner or a caregiver. She was a woman of influence, using her voice to advocate for a community that she had come to know and love so deeply. Their family was not a fairy tale of a billionaire and a maid. It was a love story, a story of two people from two different worlds who had been brought together by a child. It was a story of a man who had found his heart and a woman who had found her voice. Their home, once a symbol of William's cold, solitary success, was now a symbol of their shared love, their quiet strength, and their unwavering belief in the power of family. Leo, once a boy lost in a silent world, was now a child who was loved and understood. He still had his routines, his love for trains, and his unique way of seeing the world. But now, he had a father who knelt on the floor to play with him, and a mother who filled his life with a gentle, unconditional love. He was a happy child, a child who had found his voice, and a child who was surrounded by a family that saw him, truly and completely, for who he was. The billionaire CEO and the former cleaning woman proved that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the moments of connection, the sound of a child's laughter, and the simple, unconditional love that had changed everything forever. Their story was a testament to the idea that love, in its purest form, can bridge any divide, shatter any silence, and transform a cold, sterile world into a warm, beautiful home.